In 1812, the most powerful man in Europe led the largest army the continent had ever seen into Russia. His goal: force the Russian Empire to submit. Instead, the campaign became one of the greatest military disasters in history. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers vanished into snow, starvation, disease, and chaos. The invasion shattered the myth of French invincibility, and it marked the beginning of the fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Tonight, we tell the story of Napoleon's catastrophic invasion of Russia. By 1812, Napoleon dominated much of Europe. After years of war, the French emperor had defeated Austria-Prussia, multiple coalitions, and many rival kingdoms. His empire stretched across the continent. Kings rose and fell based on his decisions. But one major rival remained: Alexander I of Russia. At first, Napoleon and Alexander had cooperated after the 1807 treaties of Tilsit, but the alliance slowly collapsed. The biggest issue was economics. Napoleon's continental system attempted to blockade Britain by cutting off European trade. Russia increasingly resisted the policy because it damaged the Russian economy. Tensions escalated. Eventually, Napoleon decided on war. Napoleon assembled an enormous invasion force, the Grande Armée. It may have included over 600,000 men. The army came not only from France, but from across Napoleon's empire and allied states: Poles, Germans, Italians, Dutch, Austrians, and others. Never before had Europe seen such a military force gathered in one campaign. Napoleon believed a rapid advance, one decisive battle, and the capture of Russian forces would force Alexander to negotiate. The invasion began in June 1812. French forces crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory. At first, confidence was high. Many expected victory within weeks. But the Russians refused to fight the kind of war Napoleon expected. Instead of offering a decisive battle immediately, Russian armies retreated deeper into the interior. As they withdrew, they destroyed supplies behind them. This became known as the scorched earth strategy. Food disappeared, villages burned, roads became empty wastelands. The deeper Napoleon advanced, the longer his supply lines became. Heat, disease, exhaustion, and hunger began destroying the Grande Armée before winter even arrived. Still, Napoleon pushed forward. He believed one great victory would end the campaign. Finally, near Moscow, the Russians turned to fight. On September 7, 1812, the armies clashed at Battle of Borodino. It became one of the bloodiest single-day battles of the Napoleonic Wars. More than 70,000 casualties may have occurred in a single day. The fighting was savage: cannon fire, bayonet attacks, cavalry assaults, hand-to-hand combat. Napoleon technically won the battle because the Russians eventually withdrew, but the Russian army was not destroyed, and Napoleon had lost enormous numbers of experienced troops. The victory came at terrible cost. A week later, Napoleon entered Moscow. He expected the Russian government to surrender peace negotiations and a symbolic victory. Instead, he found much of the city abandoned. Then disaster struck. Massive fires erupted across Moscow. To this day, historians debate exactly how the fires spread, but large sections of the city burned. Napoleon now occupied a ruined capital with limited supplies. And still, Alexander I refused to surrender. The French emperor waited in Moscow for weeks. No peace offer came. Winter approached. In October 1812, Napoleon finally ordered retreat. What followed became legendary. The retreat from Moscow turned into catastrophe. The army faced extreme cold, starvation, disease, constant attacks, collapsing morale. Thousands froze to death. Horses died in huge numbers. Supply wagons were abandoned. Discipline collapsed. Russian forces and Cossack cavalry harassed the retreating army constantly. The Grande Armée disintegrated. One of the most desperate moments came at the Battle of Berezina. French forces needed to cross the Berezina River while Russian armies closed in. Engineers built temporary bridges under horrific conditions. Panic spread among soldiers and civilians trying to escape. Many drowned or were crushed during the crossing. Yet remarkably, Napoleon avoided complete encirclement. Even amid disaster, portions of the army escaped, but the campaign had already been destroyed. When the invasion began, Napoleon commanded perhaps over 600,000 troops. By the end, only a fraction remained combat-capable. Historians still debate exact casualty numbers, but the losses were catastrophic. The invasion shattered French military dominance. Across Europe, Napoleon's enemies realized he could be defeated. Prussia rebelled. Austria turned against him. New coalitions formed. The road to Napoleon's downfall had begun. So why did Napoleon fail? Several factors combined. Distance. Russia's enormous size overwhelmed French logistics. Scorched earth. The Russians denied supplies to the invaders. Climate. Winter intensified the disaster, though the army was already collapsing before the worst cold arrived. Overconfidence. Napoleon expected a short campaign and decisive victory. Russian resistance. Alexander I refused to negotiate even after Moscow fell. The invasion of Russia became one of history's greatest warnings about overextension, hubris, and the limits of military power. Napoleon entered Russia as master of Europe. He left with his empire beginning to collapse. And the frozen fields of 1812 became symbols of one of the greatest military catastrophes ever recorded.